Hello and welcome. I am the Letter Hack, and with me now, from the page perspective and co-host of the I Doubt It podcast with Jesse Dollimore, it's Brittany Page. Brittany, thank you for being here. How are you?
I'm doing very well, Matt. Thank you so much for having me. I have admired your work on Twitter whenever it pops into my feed, and I have zero artistic talent. So it's one thing that I really admire in other people is the ability to create something out of your mind and put it on paper. It's really remarkable. So thank you for having me.
I really appreciate that. You're telling me though that you don't have any creativity whatsoever, or
I
just
mean,
drawing.
I mean, I can be creative, I guess. I wouldn't say I'm not creative at all, but if I were to attempt to draw something right now, you would be horrified. So we're not going to do that.
Oh.
Just trust me that I cannot draw.
I've been a art teacher. I'm not allowed to be horrified. I only encourage. So this would be good for you. Okay, so you're in the hot seat. Speaking of drawing, that's what we're gonna do tonight. I'm gonna draw you. You're gonna watch me draw you, but I'm in the hot seat too because I'm gonna watch me draw you. So
Hmm.
it's always potential to be awkward for everyone. While I and I like to get that out of the way, but while I start on today's drawing, would you please give us your origin story? Tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and how you came to have more than one popular online media outlet, and what motivates you to cover the stories you cover. And we'll get to that last part in detail. So if you want to just focus on the origin of it all, that's fine.
Okay. Well, let's see. That is a broad question. I can go anywhere with it. I like the freedom. Let's see. So I am involved in political online media. So I guess I'll talk about how I got into political online media. I would say it happened in high school is where it started. I took a government class in high school, and that's where I learned that there was a particular political party that I aligned with more than the other. That would be the Democratic Party. And I think I started to learn about issues that had affected me in my childhood that had political solutions that people were working on, which I didn't know about. And so when I took government, I started to learn about those issues. And I was a poor kid. I was raised by a single mom. I was working in high school in order to help my mom pay the bills. Neither of my parents graduated high school. And so when I started to learn about solutions to poverty and government programs, and that there's one party that supports the food stamps that are helping me get my food, that really awakened a desire for political activism, I would say. And I found my way to media because I think when I was younger, people would say, you should be on the radio, you should be on TV. I think that was probably because I was annoying, and debating people all the time, whether it was my mom's adult friends, debating them about abortion, or at my first job in between making pizzas, debating the other kids that I was working with. I was very engaged and wanting to talk about these issues. So when podcasting became a thing, when everyone was starting podcasts, my partner in life and in online media, Jesse Dollimore, we said, let's start a podcast. Why not us too? So in 2014, we started I Doubt It. And it's going to be almost 10 years that we've been doing the podcast next year, which is really exciting. And then I started doing YouTube, but that's been a little bit more recent. I would say only within like the past year, I've been doing that consistently. And I think I have something unique to offer in the space because I'm a licensed therapist, a licensed marriage and family therapist. So I bring my professional background to the space, but I was also raised in the white power movement. And I think that gives me a unique perspective on a lot of the issues that we're seeing today as well. So, how's that for an origin
So,
story, Matt?
yeah, I was gonna ask, does any element of your background or you said that you were a therapist technically, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
Family
licensed
and marriage
therapist.
therapy? Okay. So, A therapist, right. So does I was gonna ask, does that affect the stories that you choose to cover, or are you just picking things out of, the day's headlines or the big story of the week? But it sounds like maybe there's a lot of things that influence the stories that you choose to cover, is that right?
Yeah, there's a lot of different things. My most viewed video on YouTube actually is about a former Boise police captain, and I'm from Idaho, so I am drawn to stories about Idaho, but particularly stories about racists in Idaho because I was raised in the white power movement in Idaho. So my highest viewed video is about a former Boise police captain who was actually exposed as a white supremacist. And I know people will say, "Wow, how surprising, a cop who was involved in the white power movement." It's not necessarily surprising, but there was actually evidence of this former Boise police captain writing racist blogs and making appearances with Jared Taylor. So it was something that was significant. And so I'm drawn to stories like that because of my background, but also in my work as a therapist, I've worked in inpatient psychiatric hospitals, nonprofit sliding scale clinics, and mandated court mandated programs. So I've touched on a lot of different areas, a lot of different populations. And so I'm drawn to a lot of stories about homelessness, poverty, our inability to provide a robust social safety net that cares for people and creates a lot of the mental health problems that I would see in my practice. And so those stories I think I'm really drawn to just to get more attention on those things, and also that there's a solution to those problems. I think it can feel pretty helpless when you are living in poverty, when you are experiencing these difficult things. Number one, to just know you're not alone, but also number two, that there are things that we need to be doing and can be doing to change that.
So how is it that you're raised in the white power movement? And you can go into as much detail about that as you like, but I think that says a lot just in itself. How is it you're raised that way and you don't end up conservative, Republican, far right? How'd you I mean, I know that you said you could see one party cared about things that people like yourself needed and others don't, but how did you avoid the brainwashing?
I think it was luck is the primary thing that I attribute it to. I am lucky and in a lot of different ways. I had adults who entered my life who were caring, compassionate, who saw that I was, denying the Holocaust happened in high school and took me aside and tried to figure out what was happening. Why is there a kid in my class who's denying the Holocaust happened? Um, I really credit it to the people who entered my life, the adults who took the time out of their day to intervene with me and show me a different way that they cared, that the world wasn't actually what it had been represented to me. And at the same time that those adults had entered my life and helped me see another way, I was slowly starting to lose respect for my parents. And so those two things were kind of happening at the same time. I started to realize, my parents, and it's not about shitting on my parents. Am I allowed to cuss on here?
Yeah, yeah.
It's I'm not intending to shit on them because I have a lot of sympathy, a lot of empathy for them. They had hard lives, but they're also Nazis. So, or was, my dad is dead now, but I slowly started to figure out, okay, these are people that were not educated. They didn't have, the correct knowledge to then impart on their children. And so the world that they represented to me was not true. But I was immersed in it. I mean, I was actually born in California. We moved to Idaho to be closer to Aryan Nations when Aryan Nations was located in northern Idaho. It is no longer located in northern Idaho, but they have a rising contingent of Nazis in that area. Again, it's a problem. But we moved to be closer to Aryan Nations, and I attended events there and saw the cross lightings and um, met people that were high up in the movement. Have my picture with them. I don't post any of the pictures that I have like a picture of me and my sister in front of a swastika flag that was hanging in our garage. I don't post those things publicly because, like, once they're out, I don't have control over it anymore. But I'm glad that I do have, record of these things. So, we were taught the typical things that Nazis will teach you, that the Holocaust didn't happen, that racial minorities are inferior to white people. Um, and they went to great lengths to try to keep us indoctrinated too. I remember in fourth grade, my mom came to my school when she learned we were learning about the history of Indigenous people in this country. And she asked that I sit outside the classroom and not hear the lesson, and gave me material to read that she approved of, which the essence of that material was that the Indians targeted white people and murdered them and scalped, pretty blonde hair from girls, just like as much hateful propaganda as you can fit into one book. This was like the material that I was given to read. And I lived in Idaho, so I wasn't really exposed to a lot of racial minorities. Idaho is still like 92% white, the state. So it's a very white area. That's why my parents moved there. But we did have some racial minorities when I was growing up in middle school in particular, and I actually made friends. I had a black girl who I was friends with who actually came over to my house. And when I tell people that story, they're like, "What are you saying? This girl came over to your house?" Her mom actually talked to my parents before she was allowed to come over and made sure that there would not be a problem. I've messaged with her mom as an adult and been like, what was that like for you to like let that happen? And anyway, all that to say, I think there were little moments where I started to branch out and started to see, okay, in this friendship, I'm not seeing that this person is a bad person. I'm not seeing that they hate white people, that they think I'm the blue-eyed devil, these things that I was told. And it slowly just started to break down over time. And it's not to say that I, you know, got rid of all of my beliefs at the same time. It's been definitely a work in progress. And I think I am someone who champions lifelong learning for this reason, because I've had to unlearn so many things in my life and relearn and continue growing and try to find the evidence for my beliefs and maintain an adherence to evidence. So yeah, I mean, it's been a lengthy process, but I would attribute it to luck, people entering my life, and helping me see the truth.
You describe yourself as a lifelong learner, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Would you say that learning is as important as, how do I want to say this? It's do you believe the more you learn, the more you teach? Like, how
Hmm.
is teaching now as important for you as learning was in your upbringing?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's what draws me to doing political media too is number one, you get to kind of think in public and have your opinions and beliefs molded by other perspectives. And sometimes there's dicks that leave comments and they're hateful. So you don't always encounter like a good faith rebuttal or a good faith exchange of ideas. But you can, and I often have. And part of the podcast that we do, I doubt it, we invite people to call, to email, to give their perspectives. And there's going to be things that we miss or don't take into consideration. And so it's nice to hear from people. What are those things that we are leaving out of the conversation, specifically because of our own experiences and our own education? We don't know everything. It's impossible to know everything. So it's important to invite those other ideas. But in producing the videos or making a podcast, it kind of requires you to continue learning and researching. And it's a bummer that Twitter has gone downhill because that was such a tremendous resource for me in following different researchers that I respect or just different thought leaders that I respect and reading their research or reading their new papers. And it's not ruined, but it's just less accessible than it once was, I think. And in doing that, you get to continue updating your beliefs and then putting them out in the world and helping other people benefit from that education too. So I think it's been a really valuable process in helping me stay current and updated in the things that I believe and trying to adhere to the evidence and in what my beliefs are. And also encouraging other people to do the same and kind of going on that journey together sometimes with the audience.
So you don't have any formal training in being on air because you have this incredibly professional um, way about you. It just there's no distinction between what you do and the mainstream media as far as like how you present yourself and how you present the show and how you carry yourself on the show. Um, Whereas you may see that distinction in a lot of independent media. Like if you watch my show, you're like, this guy obviously is not on CNN. I watch you and I go, you have what it takes to be on, and I'm glad that you're not in the mainstream. But it would appear that you have some sort of professional training, do you?
Well, thank you very much, Matt. Thank you for saying that. I also think you're great at asking questions, and
Oh, thanks.
you're like knocking yourself down a little bit, but you also are talented in carrying a conversation and interrogating things a little bit deeper. And I am picking up on that because as a therapist, that's what you have to do, right? You have to be really good
Oh, okay.
conversationally and learn which things you need to hone in on, which things you can kind of bypass, which things you want to go into a little bit deeper, and kind of putting things in the back of your mind and coming back to it. But you're also drawing while you're doing this, which is an added complication. So
Yeah.
all that to say, good job and thank you. Um, I don't have any professional training in presenting, I guess, but when you've been doing a podcast for almost 10 years and you've been talking about the news for almost 10 years, it's just going to kind of become somewhat natural. I think it was strange for me to be on camera at first, and that was difficult because number one, I have to like shower and get ready. And when you're just doing an audio podcast, you can look however you want. I guess I could still do that. It's just I would be subject to a lot of comments that I probably don't want to be. Um, and I have tried to do that. I wore like a beanie on one of the podcast episodes because I didn't wash my hair for a few days and it was a mess. And it's one of my favorite comments they wrote, "Is Brittany stuck in a coffee shop in Seattle?" So I'm like, I think I'll skip the beanies going forward. But yeah, I think it's just the doing this for as long as I have and talking about these things has just given that familiarity and makes it seem like I've been doing it probably for longer than I have, I guess.
So I ask everybody this. Are you a journalist? Are you doing a form of journalism?
Hmm. I don't call myself a journalist. I doing a form of journalism? That's a good question. I don't do original reporting, and I think that's what I think of when I think of a journalist. I think of someone who is, on a beat, they're chasing down a story, they're interviewing subjects to kind of compile the story, and that's not something that I do, although I am interested in starting to do more of that, and I have an idea for something that I want to do next year. So that's something that I possibly want to get into doing, but right now, I just use other people's sources and kind of create my own narrative and uh, message that I want to deliver to people. So I would say, no, I'm not a journalist. I mean, I guess it would be more helpful if I had like the definition of journalist in front of me, but I don't. So probably not a journalist.
Yeah, I get a wide variety of answers to that. And my point is I have people on the show with a degree in journalism who say, "No, I'm not a journalist." And
Oh.
and sometimes it's because they're not affiliated with like a form of legacy media, right? Or
Mm.
or sometimes it's because they're not in the field, or it's because they don't have an editor. Yeah, a wide variety of reasons. And I think that and tell me what you think. That does it Okay, so you don't have a degree, you don't consider yourself a journalist. Are there certain journalistic standards and ethics and etiquette that you have to adhere to anyway?
Yes, I think so. And especially, I'm a licensed therapist, and I think there's probably some people out there who think it's strange that a licensed therapist is talking about political issues online. But I maintain that mental health is political. And a lot of the issues that we see that are causing mental health problems can be traced back to society's inability to care for its population. And so, as a therapist, all that to say, the long-term solutions require that we have policy interventions that improve people's lives. That doesn't mean that therapy isn't useful or it can't be beneficial for someone who is living in poverty or struggling. It's just that the long-term solutions that are gonna help, you know, reduce the stress that people experience, help give them a better environment to work through some of those mental health issues that they're struggling with, that requires policy solutions. So it's important for me as a therapist to talk about those things, not just the individual solutions and skills that people can learn to improve their mental health. I think it requires more than that. And so that's something that I talk about a lot. But as a therapist, I don't want to overstep my boundaries. I don't diagnose people that I haven't evaluated. I don't speculate on people's cognition and what that might indicate as far as a diagnosis, because we have the gold water rule. Well, psychiatrists have the gold water rule, which means that it's unethical to give a diagnosis or speculate about someone's behavior or um, in anything about them that might be due to a diagnosis or something that's wrong with them, using your expertise and giving a professional opinion about that. And even though it applies to psychiatrists, it's broadly a principle that anyone in the mental health field should follow. So there's certain things that I don't do, just that would be unethical or that I don't see would be beneficial to do in my work.
Outside of fact checking and verifying sources, I think I would now rather more journalists adhere to psychiatric standards than journalistic standards because a lot of them just out like I say, outside of fact checking and verifying sources, if they even bother to do that, are really coming at it from, what's gonna get clicks, what's gonna get
Yeah.
views, and I think that
Mhm.
happens, online as well. Is there of all the terrible things happening in the world, do you think that there is, um, what would be the most important thing to you as somebody who covers a wide variety of this stuff? What is the most important thing to you that you think people should be focused on but aren't?
Mm.
Is there any one thing where you're like, not enough people know about this, not enough people pay attention to this? Maybe it's Project 25, maybe it is the houseless, I don't know.
Yeah, there's so many things, like, popping into my head.
It could be
Project
it could be that we need all of them, right?
Yeah, I mean, Project 2025 is definitely important. I think that's not being talked about enough. Even with the headlines of, Donald Trump saying he wants to be a dictator for one day, anytime a media outlet is talking about that story, they need to then pair that with the reporting about Project 2025 that shows that as soon as Donald Trump or any Republican takes office in 2025, that they are going to completely reshape our government. They already have a protocol in place to do it. They're going to fire tens of thousands of civil servants, replace them with loyalists who are happy to be in the cult and go along and do the bidding. So, those two things need to be put together. I think obviously the concern about getting clicks and generating views is a huge problem. And it's also a problem on YouTube. When I talk about homelessness, I know that those videos are not going to get as many views. If I were to talk about Lauren Boebert, I would get a bunch of views. But if I talk about like the latest report that was released on federal data showing that homelessness is its highest level ever, that's not going to get a ton of views. I'm going to talk about it anyway, but it's not going to get a ton of views. So it's just a bummer that there is this incentive structure for talking about things that are less important when we should be incentivizing talking about important things. But going back to your question, so I think, yes, Project 2025 is very important. I would also say, given that homelessness is at its highest rate ever recorded, and there's more than, 650,000 people that are homeless in this country, I think it's important that more people know about housing first policies. And I notice a lot of people aren't accurately educated on what housing first means. For some reason, they think it means that you take someone who has like a serious mental health diagnosis or serious substance use issue, and you put them in housing, and then you say, like, good luck. That's not what housing first is. Housing first tells you what it is with its name. It means that you provide housing first. But along with housing come wraparound services that then help someone who may be struggling with a mental health issue or a substance use issue to keep them housed. But the logic is that you can't get sober. You can't manage a serious mental illness if you don't first have the stability of a home. If you're still living on the street and you're constantly worried about how you're going to manage day-to-day activities, how you're going to keep your belongings safe, where are you going to use the bathroom, where are you going to get clean, can you leave your stuff to go to a medical appointment, can you leave your stuff to meet with your social worker? All of those problems are then alleviated by giving someone a safe, secure place to sleep. And so when I hear people speak out against housing first, and they kind of say, well, there's certain unhoused people that we should put into housing. And then there's certain unhoused people that need this other help first before they get into housing. And housing first is a successful program. It's very beneficial. It actually started with the most severe populations that people seem to think we should exclude from housing first. It began with people who have serious mental illness. It began with people who have serious substance use disorders. So I think Housing First is a program that we need to lift up. We need to talk more about. We need to fund very well. And hopefully people will start to move away from whatever they've been fed about Housing First that's inaccurate, because I see that quite a bit.
I really appreciate the way that you don't just point out the problem and go, "We got to fix this, and here's how it affects me personally." Like you're
Mm,
breaking it down because whether it's the viewer or an online media host or someone in the mainstream media, there's always I feel like the majority of us are saying, and I say us because I'm guilty of this as well. The majority of us are like, "This is a problem. Somebody fix it." And if we don't say this is a problem, here's how it's a problem because it's being addressed incorrectly or this aspect isn't being addressed whatsoever, then I think it only continues to be a problem. And the way you handle it is nurturing a solution, is creating a new discussion around the solution and not the problem. And so on that note, you aren't afraid to call out other online lefties, but I think that you do it in this highly constructive way. And it's in a thoughtful manner that, in some cases, is more thoughtful than the people whose take you're challenging, if that makes
mm.
sense, right? Do you
Yeah,
agree with
yeah.
that? Do you and I wonder, do you ever get feedback from the people that you're challenging?
Yeah, I haven't gotten feedback from people I'm challenging. It's funny, I will get comments from people that are like, "Why are you challenging this information publicly? Why don't you message them privately?" Like, people who watch the content seem to think that, like, everyone who's producing content is, like, in a network where we're all connected and in communication, and,
Yeah.
we don't know each other. But yeah, like, my most recent video was actually about the Young Turks, and I have a lot of respect for them. They've built a fantastic platform, but they are wrong on housing first. And Anna Kasparian and Jank, they say inaccurate things about housing first. They misrepresent the people who are working to alleviate the problem of homelessness. So it can be frustrating, but you heard a little bit about my origin story, you heard my background. I have to be humble, and I have to be someone who comes at these things like, okay, let's interrogate this a little bit, because I've been wrong a lot in my life and I know how it feels to be wrong, and the work that is required in, number one, admitting that you're wrong, and then going through the process of updating your views. And I try to maintain my ability to do that, even though it still is uncomfortable to admit when you're wrong about something and move forward through that process. So I try to be generous with other people who are wrong too, because I want people to be generous with me if I'm wrong. But I like what you said about people who often overemphasize their own personal experience when they're talking about stuff, because our personal experiences can get in the way. It's not something that always makes us better, right? Like we think even if our personal experience is the same as another person's experience, that we're going to land on the same side of an issue. And that's not necessarily the case. You know, one person can go through something, another person goes through the exact same thing, and they both come out believing different things about that experience, you know? So I think our personal experience, it's not always a great guide, and that we should kind of look outward more often than we do.
Maybe your personal experience should inform the conversation, not define the conversation. Is that maybe
Exactly.
a way of simplifying the point? So,
A much
do you
better way
feel
than I
like,
said it.
well, I don't know, but I'm just trying to summarize so that I make sure I hear what you're saying, and I
Yeah.
think that I think that what I get from, because I've seen it done a lot differently, where somebody is just flat out calling somebody out, and it's like you're contributing to the vitriol and the animosity, and we're not uniting and we're not building bridges, and therefore no one's learning from this, right?
Yeah.
And I know that you're getting more views, but is it worth it in the end? And so I think, I may know the answer to this, but tell me, is there a degree of what we call infighting that's good or positive?
Yeah,
Like,
I think
as
as
long as
long
we're
as
just
it's done
keeping
right.
each other honest. Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I don't know. Some of these figures that have prominent platforms, I worry about their ability to update their views anymore through feedback. And I worry that sometimes people have achieved a level of fame or status where they then feel immune from the feedback that they get from their following and no longer feel the need to update those views. And I think that gets you into dangerous territory because again, we're never you know, we're never going to be right about everything. And there's inevitably going to be things that we are leaving out of the conversation that we are not fully educated about. I mean, it's impossible to be educated about every single issue. That's why in my work, I tend to focus on specific things. Like, I am not talking about foreign affairs a ton because that's not my area of expertise. That's not something I know a lot about. Now, that isn't to say that I can't take a stand against human rights violations, which we have on our platforms, but there are just certain things that we, you know, talk about more frequently. And so I think it's difficult to have a platform and maybe feel the pressure like you need to voice your opinion about every single topic that comes up when you may not be fully educated about every single topic that comes up. Like that seems to be part of the problem. But I think remaining flexible is a skill and it takes, you know, effort and it's something that we don't see enough of. And there is a way to disagree agreeably. And I think we should definitely practice that more often. But I also think people need to be open to accepting criticism as long as it's good faith and trying to update their views as much as possible because we're not going to be right about everything.
Yeah, I think, and I've said this before, I'm sort of a broken record on this point, but I think it's possible that you become popular enough from speaking truth to power that you're the power that needs truth spoken to. And if the whole concept is, hey, we're listener supported or viewer supported, and then doesn't listening to your viewership and their opinion, isn't that like kind of key to being viewer supported? Unless, and this is what is sort of tricky with the way certain outlets do it, they say, we are this way because we're viewer supported, which means being viewer supported justifies us to be how we are right now. And there's no
Mm,
need to change. You came to us
right.
because of the way we are now, not because we're going to listen to you and grow with you. And I think that's a mistake. And I think the more popular you get, the cooler it would be if everyone would just be like, okay, now we're really listening to our audience because it's a lot of voices. And and there's
Yeah.
no way that we could possibly be giving you a take on any given issue that would appeal to literally millions of viewers. There's no way. And so I think that's when you really do need to start listening, and your perspective should be a bit more open-minded. And so you've talked about, you ch you wanna influence people positively, change their mind, you're open to your mind being changed. Do you think it's irresponsible of your average YouTube host or podcast show to not advocate for something, a form of activism or a certain issue, or, I don't know, labor organizing, voter registration? Do you think it's irresponsible for them not to at least advocate for something, much less inspire boots on the ground in some way? Should we all be doing that?
Um, it's a good question. I feel like I'm having an internal debate as you were asking the question with myself. Um, I land toward, yeah, I feel like it would be irresponsible to not be using your platform for good and encouraging people to do something to better their community, to get involved. I don't think it's useful to like sit around and just talk about how terrible things are and not try to offer something in the form of a solution or um, offer something that someone can do about that. Now, I don't always get that right. I mean, there are times where I'm consuming the news on an ongoing basis constantly for work, and I get drained and I start to feel hopeless and I start to feel like there's nothing that I can do to change the system. And I think that negativity can seep through sometimes, like on the show, and we're kind of talking about all these negative things, and we kind of lose sight of the political activist message or things that people can be doing. So I think, sometimes that's going to happen because the nature of this work is that it is draining and that it is tough to follow all of these issues and not see things change rapidly or see people in positions of power just squander that power and not do anything with it. It gets very frustrating to see that repeatedly over time. But I think it is important if you've built a platform to contribute something to helping people see that they can make choices, that they can do things, that there are things that can be done to improve our society, and that we should be working together as much as possible to do that. And so yeah, I mean, I think I land on yes, is it irresponsible to not use your platform to do that? I would say yeah. I mean, I think you need to be using your platform to make progress, to do something good. I would hope so, rather than just kind of sitting there and ruminating on all the things that are going wrong and all the things that are terrible.
What if you were pigeonholed into one subject? Can you think of one that you'd be okay with? If you got 0 clicks on everything except one topic, what would you want it to be?
Oh my gosh, that's so hard. I
Yeah.
That is very hard. I guess I could just talk about poverty because so many things are related to poverty. You can talk about food insecurity, you can talk about housing insecurity. A lot of things go into that. But it's really hard to choose just one because I feel like I have so many different interests and so many things that are important to me and that I feel like are important to talk about. Whether it's white power, Christian nationalism, racism, whether it's abortion, whether it's poverty, these different things that I tend these different clusters of topics that I tend to focus on. I feel like I feel good with the things that I'm drawn to right now and the things that I tend to talk about. And I feel like I'm doing important work and I get good feedback from people who are learning stuff alongside me. So I feel like I'm in a good spot right now, but I may change and start focusing on other things as, this election season continues and we see the hell that we're about to experience over the next
Let
10
me
months.
let let me ask you this. This is off the cuff. When people say, "Oh, the Republicans are Nazis," or "They're white supremacist, fascist," do you think to yourself, "Well, not exactly, but close," or "Yeah, they are"? Like, do you agree, or is it debatable?
Well,
Is it
if
hyperbole?
Yeah, if you are not fighting against, for example, Donald Trump just came out and again talked about immigrants coming from, I think he said Africa, Asia, and
Asia. Mhm.
yeah. Anyway, he wasn't talking about white people, is the point, and he said that they're poisoning the blood of the country. So
Yep.
he's clearly a racist. He's clearly, a white supremacist. It's very clear. It's been clear from the beginning. And if you continue to support someone who is a racist and who's a white supremacist, then yeah, I think there's an argument to be made that you are then a racist because you are supporting that. You are complicit in it. You're not speaking against it. You apparently have no problem with it. And you're voting him into power where he can then implement policies that then harm those groups that are not white. So, yeah, I mean, when people say the Republican Party is full of Nazis, it's like, yeah, it's full of racists, it's full of Nazis. I don't mind the term Nazi because I think people use it to communicate that someone is a racist. I don't think it actually like means someone who's been to Aryan nations, for example. Like, I'm not like thinking it's like stolen valor calling someone a Nazi when they're just like a racist. But something that's been concerning for me is to see the things that were taught to me in my childhood home become more mainstream and be broadcast on Tucker Carlson's show and have him not be, cast aside as a pariah, but instead be a thought leader in the conservative movement when, again, he's an open white supremacist. And he's talking about replacement theory. He's talking about these things that white supremacists, people who are active in the white power movement, are teaching their kids in secret at home. But those things are not just in secret at home behind closed doors now. They're out in the open. They're on Fox News. Donald Trump is saying them. He's the leading Republican candidate. So it's very concerning for me, coming from the background that I do, to see these things that were talked about in my childhood home that I understood to be things not everyone around me believed because I was out in that hallway in fourth grade while all my classmates were learning about Indigenous people. I was alone in that hallway. But now in 2023, I probably wouldn't be alone in that hallway. There's going to be other parents who are like, get my kid out of there. We're seeing it with the book bans, with censorship in classrooms. Parents are wanting to interfere with their child's education. And so it's concerning to me to see it become more mainstream.
Is that ultimately what motivates you to do your work?
I mean, it plays a role, certainly. I think it's important to use my experiences, use my background to try to contribute something to the conversation, to try to contribute to progress. It certainly plays a role. But I think it's just, globally my life experiences and I've been helped a lot in my life. I've had a lot of struggle in my life and I want to pay some of that forward. So it's important to me to try to pay some of that forward and to, help contribute to other people changing hearts and minds is something we talk a lot about on the show, and updating your beliefs. Those things are really important to me. And so, I want to try to help do that as much as I can.
Is the work reward enough in itself, or do you measure results in some way?
Um yeah, I think that it's nice when I get emails from people who like tell me their life story and that they feel, validated by things that I have put out there. I get messages from people that they'll say that like our podcast saved their life,
Mm,
that like they would turn on the podcast when they were feeling depressed and felt alone, and they would listen to me and Jesse laughing and telling stories, and that it made them, it like literally saved their life. And those are always very amazing messages to receive. And I never lose sight of the fact that with everything we're putting out there, we have the ability to influence people, and I take that very seriously. We try really hard to make sure that, there's not things we need to correct after talking about it on the show, that we're adhering to the facts as much as possible. And obviously there's going to be missteps, we're human. But we try really hard to make sure that we're talking about things that are factual and that are going to, improve people's empathy. I think it's important for us to kind of get stuff on the radar that has people thinking outside of their own experiences and thinking about other people and what we can do to help other people. And so, yeah, maybe it's me trying to pay it forward. Maybe it's me trying to do something with all the chaos that I've experienced.
Would would you rather be president or advisor to the president?
Oh, advisor to the president. There's no way in
Really?
hell that I would ever wanna be. Why would anyone want that job? I look at these people, and all I can think about is, why would you want that job? Like, I don't understand. I don't wanna make any of these decisions. I don't know. I've been wrong a lot in my life. Do not have things figured out. I still feel like I don't have things figured out. And I just don't, they get up there and they're like, I can solve all your problems. Like, that is just so the opposite of how I view myself, how I view life. Like, I don't have it in me.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Um, I I don't think anyone's ever said that maybe one person said they wanted to be president, but yeah,
Oh,
it's,
really?
yeah. Um,
Not to say it's a red
but
flag, but I think it's a red flag.
it might be I gotta go back and see who that was. Um, fill in the blank. If Trump wins, I'll leave the
um,
country or
yeah,
work
I take
harder.
a deep breath. I don't know, meditate.
Oh, no, that's good.
I I am gonna need to do some work if he wins again. I'm gonna need to take a break. I'm gonna need to take a break, I think, and regroup. Obviously, the work will continue, but I think that's gonna be very bad. I think that's gonna be very bad for the country if that happens. And I'm not someone who's saying that that's gonna happen. There's a lot of talk about polls right now. It's very early to be talking about polls and looking at polls, and there's too much emphasis on the polls right now. So I think people are kind of getting themselves worked up about, Biden underperforming in the swing states in the polls, for example. I don't think we need to be too worried right now, but yeah, if that happens, I think I'm just gonna take a break for a while and regroup. I think I'll need some time.
I've heard a lot of people say, "Oh, I will have so much comedy and fodder for humor and stuff like that," and I think that's bad. What I would like, because this is the guy who says the worst thing, and the very next day, he and all of his people are going, "It was a joke. He was kidding. Come on, lighten up. That's on you, not him." I think there needs to be a plan. I think there needs to be real strategizing for independent online left-wing media starting now. If that happens, what are you gonna do? How are you gonna approach it, right? Because I think that there's a lot of channels out there who've got a good thing going as far as their format and their presentation, and there's a lot of trust with their viewership. They've got millions of viewers, right?
Yeah.
But that's gonna be one of those things where everyone is, like, suddenly like, "Take a deep breath, good." But to me, like, I just remember how I felt the first time. Like, if it
Yeah.
happened again, it would be like, I'll freeze. What do I do? How do we react? And I would like everyone to have, like, a three-step plan on what they're gonna do on their show that day. But
That's
that
actually a great idea, Matt. That's a great idea, and I love that
be
you're kind of checking
pragmatic.
me a little bit because I need that, and I can preemptively take my breath, and develop a plan because you're right. I mean, I think I think back to when he first got elected, and I was one of those people who was like, this is not going to happen. There's no way. This is never going to
Yeah.
happen. Like, why would anyone do this? There's just no way this is going to happen. And of course, it happened, and it's continuing to happen. And I struggle to explain why that's happening, but it is. And so we need to deal with reality on reality's terms. And we, I think, should be prepared for that. And especially knowing the playbook, they've put it out there. Here's Project 2025. And that's why we're really starting to talk more about Project 2025 because people, I think, can be mobilized and motivated by that. But yeah, in terms of creating a plan so that we're not all just in shock and sitting there quietly, I think that's a good idea.
Well, and no pressure, but think about it. If that happens, if that happens, everyone's gonna turn on your show and at a minimum wanna hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
But when we just keep racking up viewers, and I have a small channel, but I rack up a viewer a day, 2 viewers a day consistently, when you have millions, they're going to turn to you for strategy and for direction. What should we do? Oh, everyone's in the streets protesting just like the first time. Should I do that? Where should I go? What's happening
Right.
while we're out there? There's all these things. There's a flurry of activity that's going to happen instantly, and people are going to want to tune in to these shows for direction. So I think, yeah, I don't know, maybe I'm not checking you, but I've been thinking I'm going to start bringing it up more and more. Um,
Yeah.
okay. So the way I end these interviews is, we take a sharp left turn. And
Okay.
because when we're not talking about politics and online media, we're talking about like art and comic books. Like that takes up
Mhm.
a good chunk of this show's or this channel's content. Have you ever read comic books or even once?
I haven't. No. I wish that I had more to contribute to that answer, but no, I have never been a comic book person. I have watched, superhero movies, and that is my only contribution to that.
This is exactly what I wanted to hear. Um,
Oh, really?
because a lot of people get their, what they know about comic books from like Marvel movies and what they call
Yeah.
comic book adaptations, which it's not accurate. It's more of a superhero adaptation because they aren't literally adapting one comic book into a movie. Do you know what I mean? They're
Huh. Okay.
taking elements of a variety of comics that have been told, stories that have been told for decades, and they're putting it into like 90 minutes or a
Yes.
trilogy or something like that, right? But it's never a true adaptation. So, as a comic book nerd, that just bugs me. But um, I also like to broaden the perspective of people who haven't read comics to let them know it's like it could be about literally anything. Like Senator Nina Turner was on the show, and I recommended a comic book to her called Our Numbers Be Unlimited, which is all about the history of unions told from a comic book creator who was working in an Amazon factory in
Wow.
Melbourne, Australia. Yeah. So, see what I mean? Like, she didn't know what I was going to recommend, and then bam, perfect
That's
book for
very
her.
cool.
Right. So,
Wow.
so I might not have the perfect book for you, but I do have the reverse as far as adaptations go. I have a comic book that has been hailed as the perfect version of an adaptation from a novel. Have you ever read Watership Down by Richard Adams?
I have not.
Watership Down is a classic, and they immediately made an animated feature out of it. It's a story about a group of rabbits that have to relocate to a new home. They have to go find a new, warren, I think they call it. And the rabbits talk, and they have their own glossary of terms. They come across different populations, some that are kinda communist, right? Um, some that are, I don't wanna ruin it for you, but look, it has it's a classic tale of survival, hope, courage, and friendship that has delighted and inspired readers around the world for more than 50 years. Masterfully adapted by award-winning author James Sturm and gorgeously illustrated by best-selling artist Joe Sutphin. This spectacular graphic novel will delight old fans and inspire new ones, bringing the joy of Watership Down to a new generation of readers. It has been, here's some of what people have said as far as giving it praise. Um, it is a beacon for how graphic novel adaptations should be done, and every page is a loving tribute to the original masterpiece. So they didn't just take parts of it and make it marketable. They really did a terrific job of bringing the entire novel into the graphic novel format, which is not always easy. I think you'll really appreciate it because it's not just about finding a new home, which I hear in your story, sort of the way, your upbringing led you to learning there was more out there. There was more to
Yeah.
life, and the more you learn, the more you teach. But it's about bringing everyone with you and
Yeah.
having a community and the worthwhileness of being a part of, not just a group of like-minded individuals, but people who aren't afraid to go out there and see what else there is to be offered in the world.
Oh,
So,
that's very cool.
Watership Down, the graphic novel, check it out. It's going to be really easy. It's just one book. It's not like you have to invest tons of money in a monthly subscription like I do, which is, sort of an addiction in itself.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm going
That's
to put
awesome.
links
Very
to
cool. Watership Down. Okay.
yeah, and if you do check it out, let me know what you think.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
like you tell people it's a story about rabbits. And they're like, "Oh, okay, so for kids, not at all." I mean, 50 years ago, they told this story. It's very
Yeah.
adult, and the
Okay.
rabbits have their own lore. One of the rabbits is a storyteller, and he's constantly telling, like, "This is how the world was created," right? And
Hmm.
they have their own lore, and it's a great examination of people in different communities, and different philosophies, and politics, and religion through rabbits. So, you know,
You've sold me on it.
I like
I'm very
it.
excited.
Okay.
I'm definitely gonna check it out. It sounds
Great.
very cool. Yeah.
Cool, and I guarantee you'll be reading it more than once. Okay, so I have links to all of your stuff in the description of this podcast. Is there anything, because we're pre-recording, and I think this is going to premiere. I actually think I'm going to premiere this on the 1st of January. So we're going to
Oh.
kick off the new year. Is there anything that you want to plug or promote?
You can subscribe to my podcast. I doubt it. Anywhere you get podcasts, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. It is my name, Brittany Page. And yeah, I would appreciate anyone joining the community of listeners. And just want to give you another shout out, Matt, because you're so talented. And I also appreciate that you seem to be fostering within your community of listeners compassion and keeping it like a positive environment. That seems like something that's important to you that you're really trying to implement and keep in place. And it's tough when you're dealing with an online community because there's people that can come into it and be dicks. But it seems like you're, intent on trying as much as possible to keep it a positive, respectful place. So kudos to you. And I feel honored to have been here and I appreciate the conversation.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I do want to keep it positive because that's what the rest of the internet is for, the opposite of that. And I mean, if you want that, there's plenty of places to go. So we try and keep it positive here. But I really
Yeah.
do appreciate you saying that. And one of these days we'll work out a drawing lesson or two, and I'll show you that you're wrong about your own lack of creativity. In the
I
meantime, I want to what? Go ahead.
I love your positivity. I mean, that shows it right there that you believe I can change. You believe you can make me draw. I love that. That's yes.
You'll be surprised. I want to thank everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
The letter hack. Oh my gosh. You don't fist